My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 58 years old when my parents announced, over Sunday lunch in their dining room in Columbus, that they had sold my house so my younger brother could take his family on a 6-week vacation through Italy and Greece. My mother said it as if she were telling me they had changed the cable package. The closing is Friday, she said, smoothing the linen napkin across her lap. Evan needs the money before the airfare goes up. For a few seconds, I thought I had misunderstood. The house was a small brick bungalow on Ashland Avenue, the one I had bought after my divorce, repaired room by room, and later let my parents live in when Dad's retirement income stopped covering their rent. I still paid the property taxes. I still carried the insurance. The deed was in my name. But there, beside the gravy boat, sat a blue folder with a real estate company's logo on it and a photocopy of a purchase agreement showing a sale price of $318,000. My brother Evan leaned back in his chair and said, "Come on, Dan. You knew Mom and Dad couldn't stay there forever. This helps everyone." Everyone, apparently, meant him. I looked at my father. He would not meet my eyes. Then I noticed something in the contract, a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I smiled, reached down beside my chair, and opened the worn brown folder I had brought with me. The first page was the deed. The last page was the one none of them knew existed. Stay with me, because the sale was only the newest part of a pattern I had spent most of my life mistaking for family duty. The role I had always played. I was the older son, which in our family meant I became useful before I became visible. My father, Harold, spent 37 years repairing industrial compressors at a manufacturing plant outside Columbus. He was practical, proud, and deeply uncomfortable with anything that sounded like need. My mother, Lorraine, ran the household with the kind of soft authority that rarely sounded like an order. She did not say, "You must do this." She said, "I don't know what we'll do if you can't help," and then waited for guilt to finish the sentence. Evan was 6 years younger than I was. He had charm in the effortless way some people have. Good posture. He could make Dad laugh after a bad shift. He remembered birthdays, told stories well, and somehow made every failed plan sound like an adventure interrupted by circumstances beyond his control. I was different. I became a building estimator. I spent my career looking at damaged things and calculating what it would take to make them sound again. I was good with numbers, contracts, schedules, and repairs. I was not good at disappointing people. That weakness did not feel like weakness when I was younger. It felt like loyalty. After the divorce, I bought the bungalow on Ashland Avenue. It was not impressive. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. A narrow kitchen with oak cabinets from the early 1980s. The basement smelled damp, and the back porch leaned enough that a marble would roll from one end to the other. But it was mine. I replaced the porch joists myself. I rewired the kitchen with help from an electrician I had worked with for years. I refinished the floors, planted 2 serviceberry trees, and built a set of shelves in the second bedroom for my books and estimating manuals. For the first time in my adult life, I lived in a place where no one else's emergency had a drawer. 3 years later, Dad's plant pension was reduced after a restructuring. Their rent increased by nearly 40%. Mom called me crying. "Your father thinks we can manage," she said, "but I can see the numbers." I could see them too. Their savings would last perhaps 18 months. I offered them the bungalow and moved into a 1-bedroom apartment closer to my office. The Arrangement was supposed to be temporary. They would pay utilities and a modest monthly amount toward upkeep. I would keep ownership because I had a favorable mortgage rate and because I had no interest in turning a family problem into a complicated property transfer. At first, they paid $650 a month. Then Dad had cataract surgery, and I told them to skip 2 months. After that, Mom began sending $500. A year later, the payments stopped entirely. I did not ask why. That was another one of my skills, making an uncomfortable arrangement feel peaceful by refusing to name it. Evan, meanwhile, visited often enough to be admired and rarely enough to avoid responsibility. He arrived with bakery boxes, expensive coffee, and stories. He called Dad old man in a tone that made Dad grin. He brought Melissa and their daughter, Chloe, for holidays, then left before dishes were done. Chloe was 16 when the trouble began. She was observant and quieter than her father. She liked drawing floor plans and asked me questions about buildings. I showed her how load-bearing walls worked and why old houses sometimes settled unevenly. She listened carefully, the way people do when they are more interested in understanding than impressing. One Thanksgiving, while Evan was describing a resort in Santorini he had seen online, Chloe leaned toward me and whispered, "Dad says Grandma's house is basically his inheritance. Is that true?" I looked across the table at Evan. He was holding his phone up, showing Mom pictures of white buildings above blue water. "No," I said. "The house belongs to me." Chloe frowned. "Then why does he say you're just holding it for everyone?" I could have addressed it that day. I could have asked Evan what he meant. Instead, I told myself he was simplifying things for a teenager. I told myself ownership was clear. I told myself everyone understood the arrangement. But people often understand exactly what benefits them. They simply assume the person who always gives in will continue giving in. The brown folder entered my life around that time. It had belonged to Rebecca's father, an accountant who saved every important document in labeled folders. When he died, Rebecca gave me several unused ones during our divorce because she knew I kept papers in loose stacks. "At least protect what you've built," she said. I used one folder for the Ashland Avenue house deed, mortgage statements, insurance records, tax receipts, repair invoices, a copy of my will. At first, it was just organization. Later, it became something else. The betrayal they thought I would accept. The lunch where my parents announced the sale happened on March 10th, a Sunday. 3 weeks earlier, Mom had called and asked whether I could come by to repair the basement steps. Dad's knees had worsened, and one tread felt loose. I arrived with a drill, screws, and a replacement board in the back of my car. Evan's SUV was in the driveway. Inside, he and Melissa were seated at the kitchen table with a woman I did not recognize. She wore a navy blazer and had a leather portfolio open in front of her. When I entered, the conversation stopped. Mom stood too quickly. "Daniel, I thought you were coming later. You said 10. Did I? I must have mixed it up." The woman introduced herself as Marcy Dale, a real estate agent. Evan said she was helping him evaluate future options for Mom and Dad. I asked what options. Evan gave me the calm smile he used when he wanted to make my concern look like overreaction. "Nothing is happening today. We're just discussing whether this place still makes sense for them." Dad stared down at his coffee. I looked at Marcy. "Do you know who owns the property?" She glanced from me to Evan. I was told it was a family-held home. It is owned by me, I said. Evan laughed once. Technically. There are words that reveal more than the person speaking intends. Technically was one of them. I asked Marcy to excuse us. She closed her portfolio and left without protest, though the expression she gave Evan suggested he had not been entirely honest with her. After the front door closed, Mom said, "We didn't want to upset you before we had a real plan." "A plan for my house?" "Our home," Dad said quietly. The correction hurt because I understood it. They had lived there 9 years. Their furniture filled it. Their routines shaped it. But emotional possession is not legal ownership, and gratitude should not become entitlement simply because enough time has passed. Evan began explaining. Dad could no longer manage stairs. Mom had arthritis. The neighborhood was changing. A senior apartment complex near Dublin had elevators, meals, and transportation. Selling the bungalow would fund their move and leave money for family needs. "What family needs?" I asked. He shrugged. "We all have things going on." I told them I was willing to discuss a move. I had already considered selling eventually, but only after finding my parents suitable housing and agreeing on how the proceeds would be handled. I reminded them that I still owed $71,000 on the mortgage. Melissa folded her arms. "No one said you wouldn't get that paid off. That's not the same as deciding the rest belongs to someone else." Mom pressed her fingertips together. "Daniel, must every conversation become about money?" Before I left, I told them clearly, "Do not list this property. Do not sign anything. I will return next weekend, and we can look at the senior apartments together." Mom nodded. Evan said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I answered, "It is my responsibility to make sure it is done correctly." He smiled. "There you go. Always the responsible one." The following Tuesday, I received a call from my insurance agent asking whether the property would remain owner-occupied by relatives after April. I asked why. He said a request had been made for a replacement declarations page to provide to a title company. I had made no such request. When I called Mom, she said Evan was only gathering information. When I called Evan, he told me not to turn paperwork into a family crisis. I drove to Ashland Avenue that evening. A lockbox hung from the front doorknob. Mom said Marcy had installed it for an appraisal. "You told me you would wait." "We are waiting," she said. "An appraisal is not a sale." Dad sat in his recliner with the television muted. He looked smaller than he had a month earlier. When I asked him directly whether he wanted to move, he said, "Your mother thinks it is time." That was not an answer. I removed the lockbox and placed it on the kitchen table. Evan arrived 20 minutes later, already angry. He accused me of treating our parents like children and denying them control over their own lives. "They can choose where they live," I said. "They cannot sell a house they do not own. You gave it to them. I let them live in it for 9 years. That does not change the deed." He stepped closer, not threatening exactly, but using height and volume the way he had since we were young. "Maybe it should." I looked at Mom, expecting her to tell him to stop. Instead, she said, "Daniel, you have your apartment. You never had children. Evan has a family. Sometimes fairness is not the same as equal shares." There it was. The logic beneath decades of decisions. Because I had no children, my money was more available. Because I was stable, my needs were less urgent. Because Evan had a wife and daughter, every desire could be reframed as a family necessity. "The power of attorney is not from me," I said. That's what concerned me. She emailed a copy. The document was not a power of attorney from me. It was an old healthcare power of attorney. My father had signed years earlier naming Evan as the person who could make medical decisions. If Dad became incapacitated, someone had attached it to a page titled Family Property. Authorization with my typed name at the bottom. No signature appeared on that page. I called Evan. He said, "Marcy is being overly cautious. We were going to get your signature once the offer came in." You told her Dad had authority. I told her Dad had paperwork. Those are not the same thing. He sighed. Dan, we have a buyer willing to pay cash. No repairs. No inspection drama. Mom and Dad can move into the senior place, and Melissa found a travel package that is refundable for 48 hours. This is a chance for all of us to move forward. How does your vacation help Mom and Dad move forward? He paused. Then he said, they want to give us something while they are alive. I understood then that the trip was not an incidental detail. It was part of the plan. I proposed a fair alternative. I would sell the bungalow if Mom and Dad truly wanted to move. From the proceeds, the mortgage and closing costs would be paid. I would contribute $50,000 toward their senior housing, plus cover their moving expenses. The remaining equity would stay with me because it was my property and part of my retirement plan. Evan called the offer cold. Mom called it legalistic. Dad said nothing. I put the proposal in writing and mailed a copy to each of them. I also placed one in the brown folder. A week passed without an answer. Then Mom invited me to Sunday lunch. I arrived carrying the folder because I had begun to understand that every important conversation in my family became blurry later. Words changed. Promises softened. Agreements became misunderstandings. Paper did not. On the dining table sat roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and the blue folder from the real estate company. Evan and Melissa were already there. Chloe was not. Mom waited until we had all been served before announcing the house had been sold. She said the cash buyer had increased his offer by $6,000 in exchange for a quick closing. She said Dad had signed the contract. She said they had put down a deposit on the senior apartment. She said Evan had already booked the vacation package because the promotion ended at midnight. Then she slid the purchase agreement toward me. My name appeared on the seller line. The signature was close enough to fool someone who had seen mine only a few times. The first letter leaned correctly. The last name had the same long final stroke. But whoever signed it had copied from my Christmas cards and missed the small break I always left between the R and C. I looked at Evan. He did not look away. We had to keep things moving, he said. You were going to agree eventually. That was the betrayal they thought I would accept. Not only the attempted sale. The assumption that my consent was a delay, not a requirement. I smiled because anger would have given them the scene they expected. Then I opened the brown folder. The details that didn't make sense. The first page I removed was a certified copy of the deed showing me as the sole owner. The second was the current mortgage statement. The third was the written proposal I had sent the week before. Evan glanced at the pages and said, "We know all that." "Then you know this contract cannot close without me." Mom's expression tightened. "Daniel, we have already made commitments. Commitments using money from property you do not own." She looked wounded, as if I had accused her of stealing silverware. "After everything we did for you growing up." I had expected that sentence. What surprised me was how little power it had once spoken aloud. I asked who signed my name. No one answered. I asked again. Dad finally said, I did. His voice was barely above a whisper. Mom reached for his hand. Evan stared at the table. I knew immediately that Dad was protecting someone. His hands shook from essential tremor. He had stopped writing checks 2 years earlier because his signature had become uneven. The forged signature on the contract was smooth. No, you didn't, I said. Dad's face changed, not with surprise but relief. He had offered himself as the shield and was grateful I had not accepted the lie. Evan said, does it matter? You're here now. Sign it properly and we can stop humiliating Dad. The ability to reverse guilt was his most reliable talent. I closed the folder halfway. The contract is not valid. The closing will not happen Friday. The vacation is your problem. Melissa spoke for the first time. The package is non-refundable after tonight. Then cancel it before tonight. We promised Chloe. Chloe isn't here. Does she know where the money is coming from? Melissa looked at Evan. That answer mattered. Mom pushed back from the table. You always do this. You turn kindness into an audit. I stood. No. I spent years turning an audit into kindness. That is why none of us knows where the line is anymore. I left before dessert. The next morning, I called the title company listed on the contract. I told them I was the owner and that my signature had been forged. They requested identification and a notarized affidavit. I provided both. The file was placed on hold. I also called Marcy. She sounded genuinely distressed. She said she had withdrawn from representing the family after discovering the authorization issue, but Evan had contacted another agent. The new agent had apparently accepted Dad's claim that I had orally authorized the transaction and would sign at closing. That should never have been enough, Marcy said. It wasn't enough, I replied. It was only enough to create a mess. The cash buyer, a local landlord named Peter Klein, called me that afternoon. He was direct but not hostile. He said he had been told the house belonged to my parents and that I held title only for estate planning reasons. I paid a $10,000 earnest deposit, he said. My contractor is scheduled for Saturday. I did not authorize the sale. Then someone has a serious problem. Evan described me as a passive investor who had no emotional connection to the house. He said, my parents had paid all costs for years. He claimed I had agreed to transfer the property as part of an informal family settlement after my divorce. He wrote that I was difficult with paperwork but would sign once the final numbers were ready. One email contained an attachment titled Mercer Family Equity Plan. It showed the expected proceeds divided into 4 categories: mortgage payoff, senior apartment, reserve, travel gift to Evan, and Daniel reimbursement $15,000. That evening, Chloe called me. She said, Uncle Dan, are Grandma and Grandpa losing the house because of you? I sat at my kitchen counter, looking at the brown folder. Who told you that? Dad said you changed your mind after they already sold it. Mom said the trip might be cancelled. Because you want all the money. She was quiet. Then she said, he told me Grandpa bought that house for you years ago. No. I bought it. I thought so. There was something in her tone. I asked why. She told me she had seen a box of old statements in the guest room closet while helping Mom pack. They were addressed to me. Mortgage statements, insurance notices, tax bills. She had asked Evan why my name was on everything. He told her it was because I handled paperwork for The family. There was also an envelope, she said. Grandpa told me not to let Dad throw it away. What envelope? I don't know. It had your name on it. Grandpa put it behind the cookbooks in the kitchen cabinet. I drove there after work the next day. Evan's SUV was gone. Mom opened the door but did not invite me in. I came for an envelope Dad set aside for me. Her eyes moved toward the kitchen. Chloe should not involve herself in adult matters. Then it exists. Dad called from the living room. Let him have it, Lorraine. Mom stood aside. The envelope was behind a row of cookbooks, exactly where Chloe said. My name was written in Dad's shaky hand. Inside was a handwritten note and a bank statement from an account I did not recognize. The note said, Dan, I should have told you sooner. Your mother and Evan opened this after the roof insurance payment. I did not understand until last month. I am sorry. The bank statement showed an account titled Mercer Home Fund with Mom and Evan as joint owners. Over 4 years, deposits totaling $34,700 had gone into it. The largest deposit was an insurance payment of $18,900 issued after a hailstorm damaged the roof of the Ashland house. I had paid for the roof replacement myself because Mom told me the insurance claim had been denied. It had not been denied. The payment had been deposited into an account I did not know existed. Additional deposits matched checks I had given Mom for plumbing repairs, a furnace replacement, and accessibility updates to the bathroom. The corresponding withdrawals included payments to Evan's credit cards, a cruise deposit, and transfers to Melissa. I read the statement twice. Dad watched me from his chair. I thought the account was for house expenses, he said. Lorraine said Evan was helping manage it. Mom's voice became sharp. We used that money for family needs. The roof was still replaced. By me. Because you could afford it. That answer was so honest it left no room for misunderstanding. I asked whether Evan had forged my signature. Mom did not answer directly. She said he was under pressure. The travel company needed proof of funds. Did you know? I knew he was handling the documents. Did you know he signed my name? She looked toward Dad, then back at me. We believed you would do the right thing once you calmed down. The right thing meant making their wrongdoing easier to complete. I placed the statement and Dad's note inside the brown folder. The folder no longer felt like a collection of property records. It felt like a record of how often I had ignored evidence because acknowledging it might cost me my family. The truth I could no longer ignore. I met with an attorney named Priya Shah 2 days later. She had handled construction disputes for one of my former employers and understood both documents and family complications. I brought the brown folder. Priya read quietly for nearly an hour. She asked precise questions. Had I ever signed a lease? No. Had I ever transferred ownership? No. Had I granted a power of attorney? No. Had I authorized anyone to endorse insurance checks? No. Did the policy list me as the insured owner? Yes. She explained that the attempted sale could not close without my valid signature. The title company had already frozen the file. The forged contract could expose the person who signed it to civil and potentially criminal consequences, but pursuing that path would be my decision. The misdirected insurance payment was more complicated. We would need to determine how the check had been issued and endorsed. What do you want? She asked. It was the simplest question and the hardest one. I want the sale stopped, I said. I want my parents housed safely. I want the money taken from the insurance payment returned. And I want my brother to stop treating my property as his account. Priya nodded. Those goals are compatible, but only if you are willing to let consequences occur. Rebecca had once said something similar. Priya sent formal notices to the title company, buyer, second real estate agent, and my parents. She also instructed me not to discuss settlement terms by phone because my family had already shown a habit of rewriting conversations. Within hours, Mom called 7 times. I answered the 8th. You hired a lawyer against your own parents, she said. I hired a lawyer because someone forged my name. Your father is sick over this. Dad did not sign it. A pause. He told you that? He did not have to. She lowered her voice. Evan only copied your signature because the buyer needed the contract. That day. It was not meant to harm you. There it was, confirmation. Using my name to sell my house harms me. You would have signed eventually. No. The word felt unfamiliar in my mouth, not because I had never used it, but because I had rarely allowed it to stand without explanation. Mom began to cry. She said the senior apartment could keep their deposit if the move did not proceed. She said Evan had already spent $12,600 on flights and lodging. She said Melissa had requested unpaid leave from work. She said Chloe had been looking forward to seeing Rome since middle school. I told her I was still willing to support their move under my written proposal. The house could be listed properly, with me as seller. I would contribute $50,000 toward their housing and pay moving costs. But Evan would receive nothing from the sale. The stolen insurance funds would be repaid. And he would sign a written acknowledgement that he had no ownership interest in the property. Mom said, "You are asking us to choose between our sons." No. I am asking you to stop choosing him with my money. She hung up. The next escalation came from Peter, the buyer. He had every right to demand the return of his earnest deposit. The funds, however, were no longer in the brokerage escrow account. The second agent had released them based on a document Evan provided showing that the seller had authorized immediate release for relocation expenses. The seller's authorization carried my forged signature. Peter's attorney demanded repayment within 10 business days. Evan had used $7,500 of the deposit for the vacation and given $2,500 to the senior apartment complex. Priya told me I was not responsible for returning money I had never received, but the dispute could delay any legitimate sale. Peter might file a claim against multiple parties and record a notice affecting title until the matter was resolved. I called Evan one time, with Priya on the line. "You need to return Peter's deposit," I said. "I don't have it." "Then cancel the trip and recover what you can. The airfare is non-refundable." Priya asked whether he had purchased travel insurance. He said yes, but cancellation for a family disagreement was not covered. I offered another fair solution. If Evan repaid the full $10,000 deposit within 10 days and returned the $18,900 insurance payment, I would not report the forged contract to law enforcement. I would still require a signed civil settlement, but I would allow him time to repay the remaining house fund withdrawals through a structured plan. He called the offer extortion. Priya replied evenly, "It is an opportunity to resolve documented claims without escalation. You are free to reject it." He rejected it. Not because he had a better solution, but because accepting would require him to describe what he had done in language that did not flatter him. 2 days later, a story appeared on Melissa's social media page. She did not use my name, but She wrote about a wealthy relative who was evicting elderly parents and destroying a child's dream trip over technical ownership. Then Chloe sent me a screenshot of a family group chat. Evan had written, "Dan has always resented that Mom and Dad love my family. He has no one to leave the house to, so he is holding it over us." Mom responded, "He will come around. He always does." That sentence hurt more than the rest because it was not cruel. It was confident. He always does. They were not afraid of losing me. They were waiting for the familiar version of me to return. That evening, I opened the brown folder and reached the final page, a copy of my will, signed 18 months earlier. I had almost forgotten the specific provision Rebecca had encouraged me to include. If I died while my parents were living in the ISmiled house, they would receive a life estate allowing them to remain there for as long as either of them lived. After that, the property would pass to Chloe, not Evan. I had made the choice because Chloe cared about the house and because I wanted to protect my parents without putting the property directly in Evan's hands. Only Priya and I knew. That was the last page none of them knew existed. I changed the will the following Monday. Not to punish Chloe. I created a trust for her education and future housing, managed by an independent trustee until she turned 30. The ISmiled property would no longer pass automatically. If I kept it, the trust could purchase it at market value from my estate. If I sold it, a portion of the net proceeds would fund the trust. I also removed my parents' life estate because their attempt to sell the house showed that the arrangement could not safely continue without formal boundaries. Then Dad called me from a number I did not recognize. He was at a pharmacy. He had walked there while Mom was at a hair appointment because he did not want her to hear. "I need to tell you the rest," he said. The line I finally drew. Dad told me Evan had been planning the sale for nearly 6 months. Evan asked my parents for help. They had little savings, so Mom suggested the house. Dad reminded her it belonged to me. Mom said I would never let them suffer and that, because I had no children, the equity would eventually go to the family anyway. Evan researched sale prices. He calculated that after paying debts and funding the senior apartment, there would still be enough for the Europe trip they had postponed twice. He framed the trip as something my parents could give Chloe before she left for college. "Your mother liked that part," Dad said. "She wanted to be the reason Chloe remembered Europe." I asked about the forged signature. Dad said Evan signed it at the dining room table. Mom watched. Dad objected, but Evan said it was only to secure the offer and I would replace it at closing. When Dad threatened to call me, Mom told him the stress would worsen his blood pressure and that he was ruining the family's last chance to do something joyful together. "I let them use my silence," Dad said. "Then I said I signed it because I thought maybe you would be less angry with me." "Why did you keep the bank statement?" I asked. "Because I knew one day you would ask where the insurance money went." "Why didn't you tell me then?" His answer was painful in its simplicity. "I was afraid your mother would leave me." At 79, after 55 years of marriage, Dad feared loneliness more than dishonesty. I understood the fear. Understanding did not erase the damage. I told him I would not force them out immediately. But the informal arrangement was over. They would need to move to the senior apartment or sign a real lease at market-based rent, with no authority to list, borrow against, alter, or represent ownership of the property. Dad said, "Your mother will call that punishment." It is a boundary. To her, those are the same thing. They are not the same to me anymore. Priya drafted a settlement proposal with a 10-day deadline. Its terms were straightforward. The fraudulent sale contract would be rescinded. Peter's $10,000 deposit would be repaid by Evan. The $18,900 insurance payment would be returned to me. Evan would acknowledge in writing that he had forged my signature and had no interest in the property. In exchange, I would not pursue additional civil claims for the other withdrawals from the Mercer Home Fund, and I would not make a criminal complaint unless further fraudulent documents surfaced. For my parents, I offered two choices. They could proceed with the senior apartment, with my promised $50,000 contribution and moving costs, or remain temporarily under a 6-month lease while finding other housing. Either way, they would sign a statement recognizing my sole ownership. I also offered to pay for an independent financial counselor to help Evan and Melissa restructure their debts. We sent the proposal by certified mail and email. Evan responded with a counteroffer demanding $60,000 from the future house sale, claiming it represented compensation for the care he had provided our parents. He also wanted me to pay the vacation cancellation costs and agree not to disclose the forgery to anyone in the family. I rejected the counteroffer. Mom then requested a family meeting at the Ashland house. She said no lawyers. Priya advised against it, but I agreed on the condition that the conversation be recorded openly. Ohio law did not require everyone's consent for a participant to record, but I wanted no secrecy. I placed my phone in the center of the table and told them it was recording. Evan objected immediately. Why? I asked. We are all going to tell the truth. He sat down. The blue real estate folder was gone. I brought the brown one. Mom began by saying families should not need contracts. I replied, we did not need contracts when everyone respected the truth. She said they had assumed the house would eventually belong to Evan because he had Chloe. Why? Because property should stay in the family. Am I not family? That is not what I meant. Then say what you meant. She looked at Evan. You have always been self-sufficient. There it was again. Competence used as evidence that I needed less consideration. I asked Evan why he believed he deserved money from the sale. He said, because I've been here. I've taken care of them while you built your comfortable life across town. I lived 14 minutes away. I listed the expenses I had covered: mortgage, taxes, insurance, roof, furnace, plumbing, bathroom modifications, yard service, medical co-pays, and Dad's hearing aids. The total exceeded $143,000. Over 9 years, not including the lost rent I could have earned. Evan said, you always reduce love to numbers. I opened the folder and removed the Mercer family equity plan he had sent Peter. You created this spreadsheet. He looked away. You reduced my house to numbers before I knew it was for sale. Melissa said they had made mistakes but could not lose everything over one bad decision. What does losing everything mean? I asked. She said they might have to sell one SUV, cancel the kitchen renovation, and refinance their debt. Those were consequences, not destruction. Mom turned to me. What would make you happy, Daniel? Watching your brother fail? I answered honestly. No. I do not think I will be happy about any part of this. I want him to stop using me as the cost of avoiding failure. Dad spoke then. Sign the settlement, Evan. Everyone turned toward him. His voice shook, but he continued. You signed Daniel's name. Your mother knew. I kept quiet. We were wrong. Mom stared at him. Harold. He did not retreat. We were wrong. It was the first time I had heard my father choose truth over peace. Evan stood. Fine. Everybody wants me to be the criminal. Sit down, Dad said. Evan did not. He pointed at me. You think that folder makes you better than us? I looked down at it. The corners were worn. The label had begun to peel. It did not make me better. It made denial harder. No, I said. It reminds me that facts do not become cruel because someone dislikes them. Evan left. Melissa followed. Mom remained at the table, crying without sound. Dad reached for her hand. She pulled away. The 10-day deadline expired without payment. So I drew the line I had hoped not to draw. Priya notified Peter's attorney that I would cooperate fully in claims against the people who had received and misused his deposit. She sent the forged documents and bank records to the brokerage's insurer. She also informed Evan, in writing, that unless the $18,900 insurance payment was returned within 5 business days, we would file a civil action seeking repayment and damages. I served my parents with a formal 6-month notice ending their free occupancy. They could accept the senior apartment with my contribution or arrange other housing. I would not withdraw the notice. Mom called it an eviction. I called it the end of an arrangement they had tried to sell. On the 4th morning, I received an email from Chloe's school account. It contained one sentence: I know you did not steal the house. I printed it and placed it in the folder. The day everything changed. The day everything changed was not the day the police arrived, because no police arrived. It was not the day a judge ruled, because no judge made an instant decision. It was the day the consequences became visible to everyone at once. That day was April 27th, 7 weeks after the Sunday lunch. My parents had scheduled a retirement anniversary gathering at a community hall near their church. The event had been planned months earlier to mark Dad's 37 years at the plant and their upcoming move. About 40 people attended: relatives, old coworkers, neighbors, and church friends. I had not planned to go. Mom had not invited me directly, but Dad called and asked. I don't want the story told without you in the room, he said. By then, several things had happened. The brokerage's insurer reimbursed Peter's $10,000 deposit after determining that the agent had released escrow funds without proper authority. The insurer then sought recovery from Evan and the agent. The agent lost her position with the brokerage pending review. The travel company canceled the remaining hotel bookings after the second payment failed. Evan and Melissa kept the non-refundable airfare but could not afford the trip expenses. They tried to sell the tickets, discovered the names could not simply be transferred, and eventually accepted airline credits minus fees. To repay part of the missing money, they sold Melissa's SUV and canceled the kitchen renovation contract. The contractor retained a deposit. Their credit card balances did not disappear, but the immediate crisis forced them into the financial counseling they had previously rejected. Most importantly, Dad and Mom accepted the senior apartment option. The bungalow would be listed properly after they moved. I honored my offer, $50,000 toward their housing reserve and full moving costs. I did not deduct the insurance money from that support, though Priya advised that I could. The $18,900 was repaid in 3 parts: $7,000 from the SUV sale, $6,500 borrowed against Evans' retirement account, and $5,400 from Mom's hidden savings account. The repayment did not restore trust, but it closed one financial wound. Evans still refused to sign an acknowledgement of forgery. He insisted the signature had been a temporary placeholder. Priya filed a civil complaint seeking a declaration that he had no interest in the property and damages related to the fraudulent documents. The case had not yet resolved. Mom wore a blue dress and the same pearl earrings. Dad wore a dark suit that hung loosely at the shoulders. Evan stood near the dessert table in a charcoal jacket, speaking to my uncle. Melissa was beside him. Chloe was across the room with two friends from school. When she saw me, she did not wave, but her posture eased. I carried the brown folder under my arm. Not because I intended a confrontation. I had brought documents for Dad to sign regarding the moving company. By then, the folder went wherever the house went. Then Mom tapped a spoon against a glass and asked for everyone's attention. She thanked people for supporting her and Dad through a difficult family transition. She praised Evan and Melissa for helping them pack. She thanked the church volunteers who had arranged the event. She did not mention me. I expected that. Then my aunt called from a nearby table, "And what about Daniel?" The room shifted. Mom held the microphone with both hands. "Daniel has chosen to help in his own way." It was an elegant sentence. It sounded generous while suggesting distance. Evan took the microphone from her. "Let's not make this uncomfortable," he said. "We all know families handle stress differently. Some people show up. Some people send paperwork. A few people laughed uncertainly. I felt the old reflex rise: stay quiet, protect the event, absorb the insult. Dad's retirement gathering was not the place. Mom would be embarrassed. Chloe would be caught in the middle. Then Evan continued. "But Mom and Dad are moving forward, even after someone pulled the house sale out from under them. We will make sure they are taken care of." He said someone, but he looked directly at me. Dad stood from his chair. He moved slowly to the front of the room and held out his hand for the microphone. Evan hesitated, then gave it to him. Dad looked at me first. Then at the guests. "I need to correct that," he said. Mom whispered, "Harold, not here." He heard her. He continued anyway. "Daniel did not pull a sale out from under us. We tried to sell a house that belongs to him. Evan signed Daniel's name without permission. Lorraine and I allowed it. Daniel still gave us money to move." No one spoke. Dad's hand shook around the microphone. "He has paid for that house for 9 years. He paid for repairs. We used insurance money that should have gone to him. He asked us to stop, and we did not." Evan stepped forward. "Dad, you're confused." Dad turned toward him. "No. I was confused when I thought keeping quiet was the same as keeping this family together." The sentence landed harder than anger would have. Mom reached for the microphone. Dad lowered it. My aunt looked at me. "Is that true?" I did not want to perform my pain for the room. I said only, "Yes." Evan's face tightened. "So now we're doing a trial at Dad's party?" "Fine. Show them your folder." "Dan. That's what you came for, isn't it?" I walked to the front and opened the folder on the table beneath the retirement photographs. I did not read every number. I did not display Dad's private note. I removed 4 pages. The deed showing my ownership. The written proposal offering $50,000 for my parents' housing. The forged purchase agreement. The repayment receipt for the $18,900 insurance money. "I did not ask my parents to leave without help," I said. "I offered to fund their move. I asked that my brother not receive money from the sale of my house. That offer was rejected. My name was signed anyway." Evan said, "You are leaving out everything I've done for them." I looked at him. "Then tell the truth about what you did." "All of it." He opened his mouth, but Melissa touched his arm. For the first time, she spoke against him. Stop. He pulled away. You think this is all me? Your name is on the account too. A new truth appeared in the room. Melissa stared at him. What account? Evan realized too late that she did not know about the Mercer Home Fund. He had told her the vacation money was a gift from my parents' house sale. He had not told her about the diverted insurance payment or the earlier withdrawals. She asked again, quieter. What account, Evan? He said, it's complicated. She answered, no. It keeps being called complicated when someone wants me not to ask. Chloe had moved closer. Her face was controlled, but she was listening to every word. I understood then that the strongest reversal was not the folder proving I owned the house. Ownership had always been provable. The deeper reversal was that the family story protecting Evan could no longer survive contact with all the people it depended on. Dad had spoken. Melissa had learned she was also being deceived. Chloe had seen that the cancelled trip was not stolen from her by me. It had been built on money taken from someone else. Mom sat down at the nearest table. She looked not defeated, but old. For years, she had managed family reality by deciding which truths could be spoken. In one afternoon, that authority was gone. Evan left the hall without saying goodbye. Melissa remained. So did Chloe. Dad signed the moving documents at a side table. When I handed him the pen, his fingers trembled. I should have done that sooner, he said. Yes, I replied. It was not forgiveness. It was honesty, and for that day, honesty was enough. As I closed the brown folder, Chloe approached. She said, was the house really going to come to me someday? I looked at her, surprised. Grandpa told me, she said. Before all this, I explained that my old will had included a plan to protect my parents and eventually leave the property to her, but that I had changed it after the attempted sale. I told her there was now a trust for her education and future housing, with safeguards that did not depend on any family member controlling it. She swallowed. Did you change it because of me? No. I changed it so no one could use you as a reason to take something again. She nodded slowly. Then she said, I don't want a house that costs you your family. I answered, the house did not cost me my family. The truth showed me what the arrangement had already cost. What remained afterward? My parents moved into the senior apartment in mid-May. I visited once during the first month. Mom was polite in the way people are polite to a professional they do not trust. She offered coffee. I fixed a cabinet hinge. We discussed Dad's medication and the moving company refund. We did not discuss the forged contract. Before I left, she said, I hope you are satisfied. I looked around the apartment. Their furniture fit. The building was safe. The $50,000 reserve covered more than 2 years of the housing gap between their income and expenses. They were not abandoned. Satisfied is not the word, I said. She turned away. Our relationship remained damaged. I stopped calling every Sunday. She stopped asking for small favors that were rarely small. We spoke when necessary. I did not punish her with cruelty, but I no longer offered closeness as proof that nothing had happened. Dad called me separately. Sometimes he apologized. Sometimes he asked about baseball. I preferred the baseball calls. Repeated apology can become another request for the injured person to provide relief. What mattered more was that he began making choices without asking Mom's permission. He opened his own checking account. He updated his medical documents. He told Evan he would not lie for him again. Evan and Melissa separated in June. The separation was not caused only by the house. Their debts, his secrecy, and years of unstable decisions had already strained the marriage. But the account revelation at the retirement gathering removed Melissa's ability to believe she knew the full story. She rented a townhouse with Chloe and began working extra shifts at the dental practice where she managed billing. She sent me a brief email apologizing for the social media post. She did not ask me to forgive her. I appreciated that. Evan moved into a furnished apartment. He completed the financial counseling program after the brokerage insurer filed a recovery claim. Priya negotiated a civil settlement in August. He acknowledged signing my name without authority, agreed that he held no interest in the Ashland property, and accepted a repayment plan for legal costs and the remaining improperly withdrawn funds. I agreed not to pursue additional damages as long as he complied. No criminal complaint was filed. The bungalow sold in September for $329,000 after a proper listing, inspection, and closing. The buyer was a nurse named Camille Reyes who planned to live there with her mother. She loved the serviceberry trees and the built-in shelves. During the final walkthrough, she ran her hand along the repaired back porch railing and said, "Someone took care of this place." I almost told her the whole story. Instead, I said, "I tried." After paying the remaining mortgage, commissions, taxes, and closing costs, my net proceeds were a little over $238,000. I used part of the money to pay off the loan on my apartment investment account, added to my retirement savings, and funded Chloe's trust with $40,000. I did not give Evan any portion. We did not speak for 11 months. When he finally called, his voice sounded less polished. "I'm not calling for money," he said. "All right. I figured you would think that." I did. He exhaled. "I still think you made everything public. You spoke about me publicly first." Dad corrected it. "You opened the folder after you told me to." He was quiet. Then he said, "I thought you would fix it." "You always fixed things." It was the closest he came to explaining himself. "I did fix it," I said. "Just not for you." He laughed once, without humor. "You always have the perfect line now?" "No. I spent 11 months thinking about that one." We spoke for 9 minutes. He did not apologize fully. He said he had been desperate. He said Mom had encouraged him. He said Melissa had wanted the trip too. He said he never believed the sale would hurt me because I had a good job and no children. I told him that was the belief he needed to examine, that another person's stability made their losses less real. Before we ended the call, he said, "Do you hate me?" I answered, "No. But I do not trust you. Those are different things." That remained true. Chloe started college the following year and chose architecture. The trust paid part of her tuition. After scholarships, she visited me during winter break and brought a roll of drawings for a small community housing project. We spread them across my kitchen counter. She had designed apartments for older adults around a shared courtyard, with wide doorways, natural light, and no unnecessary stairs. "I kept thinking about Grandma and Grandpa," she said. I showed her where the roof drainage might cause trouble. She changed the slope and made notes in the margin. Before leaving, she asked whether I still had the brown folder. I brought it from the hall closet. It was thicker now. The deed had been replaced by the closing statement. Dad's note remained. So did Chloe's printed email, "I know you did not steal the house." But its meaning had changed again. At first, it represented ownership. Then evidence. Then defense. Eventually, it became a record of the moment I stopped treating self-erasure as kindness. I no longer carried it everywhere. I did not need paper beside me to say no. That was its final gift. My mother and I reached a limited peace before Dad died 3 years later. She never offered the apology I once imagined. Instead, she began doing smaller things. She stopped blaming me when relatives asked about the house. She corrected one woman at church who said I had evicted them. She mailed me a birthday card without adding a request. Once, after Dad's funeral, she said, "You did more for us than we admitted." It was not enough to restore what we had. It was enough to show she knew. Years ago, Rebecca told me I confused being needed with being loved. I thought setting boundaries would reveal that no one loved me. In reality, it revealed which relationships depended on my usefulness and which could survive my refusal. Some did not survive. That was the bitter part. The sweeter part was quieter. I slept better. I stopped checking my phone with dread. I made decisions about retirement without calculating which family emergency would consume them. I learned that generosity chosen freely feels different from generosity extracted through guilt. I still help people. I helped Chloe with tuition. I supported my parents' move. I forgave part of what Evan owed. The difference is that help now has a beginning, an end, and a name. The brown folder now rests on a shelf beside my old estimating manuals. I open it perhaps once a year. The first page is no longer the deed. It is a photograph Chloe took of the Ashland bungalow on the day before closing. The front steps are swept. The windows reflect late afternoon light. On the back, she wrote, "A boundary is also a blueprint." I think that is right. For most of my life, I believed peace meant preventing anyone I loved from facing consequences. Now I understand that peace without truth is only a delay, and the person who pays for that delay is usually the one least willing to cause a scene. So here is the question I would leave with you: if protecting your family requires you to betray yourself, is it still protection?